To do justice. Maybe because we've come for a long way, we have 40 minutes, I think. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, I'll do my best. Maybe I can sing if you guys get bored.
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
great.
Great. So thank you so much, and thank you to the Brand Forum, and many thanks to Sharif Islam, my good friend, who's been to Chicago a few times. He and I met in Jakarta at Kinasien with our friends at Mark Plus a number of years ago. And my first trip to Bangladesh was actually in 2010 as a result of my good friend Mabu Brahman, who's here somewhere. I don't see, maybe he stepped out for a moment. There he is, from HSBC. I love going places because I love people. I love specific people. And one of the key points I would like you to take away from today is that more than anything else, innovation, entrepreneurship is about trust. Very few people talk about this term when they talk about innovation. They talk about technology, they talk about foresight, they talk about design thinking, they talk about all these things. But number one ingredient that is required, it's not enough, but it's required is trust. Why is this? Because if we've never met, and I come to you with a crazy idea, you just think I'm crazy. Now, on the other hand, if we've known each other for 5 years, and we've worked together, and we trust each other, and I share my same crazy idea with you, you say that idea sounds crazy, but I know you're not crazy, Rob, so let's go have lunch and talk about it. So more than the insight, the ideas, the concepts, the frameworks, the lists that you get here at this event, I want you to build relationships with the people around you, people whom you have not yet met. To build trusted relationships radically enhances your ability to create new things. I'd also like to say that I travel a lot around the world, and it's very exciting to be here for me. I love my country. My family's been in the colonies, United States, for almost 400 years now. I have a deep love for my country, but I have to say my country is experiencing a lot of anxiety and angst right now, a transition going on in the world that we're having a difficult time grappling with, and it is causing a lot of doubt, even fear. I still believe that the future of America is great, but where we are right now is a very challenging and fearful moment. But then I come here, and I see energy, I see excitement, I see challenges. I see great challenges, but I see the speakers this morning, the people in the room here, you, rising to that occasion. I see a country that's not just asking the next 10 years, which is impressive, but the next 25 years. Mr. Choudhury just talked about a vision for 2041. I ask you to consider which one of the businesses you run today will have the same or similar business model in 2041 that you do today. I would argue that all of your businesses will be fundamentally different in 10, 20, 30 years. The question is not if they will be transformed, but when and how. And so it is clear that whatever business you have now will not be the business that you will have in 10, 20, 30 years as Bangladesh rises, and rise it will, given all that I've seen here just today. And I will say, between Bangladesh and the United States, we are better together. I already mentioned that Sharif comes to Chicago every year for our event. Now the KIN is becoming the World Innovation Network, or the TWIN. The World Innovation Network, because we have our good affiliate in Indonesia, we have one in Japan, we have one in Colorado, we're building one in Finland, and maybe perhaps South Asia will be next. So what I'd like to do now is, and this will go very quickly, if I could have the slides posted. I currently have the last presenter's slides on the deck here. If somebody could come and set up the slides. I'd like to talk a little bit about foresight for the future. And what do we do with it? What is it? And then provide you with some, let's say, meta-foresight about where all business in various ways is going. Now, Sharif asked me to talk about what I'm seeing around the world. So I haven't customized remarks specifically for Bangladesh, but that's okay, because all of you know far better how to customize my remarks to Bangladesh than I ever will. And in fact, I'm looking forward to opportunities this afternoon and this evening to hear your input and thoughts about how this looks for your economy and your future. So maybe I can just give the last presenter's speech again, since apparently those are the slides that I have. If you'll give me a moment here, I'm not really sure why the slides aren't up, but we're going to put them up anyway. Let's see. Oh, and we even have a dialog box. I love dialog boxes. Those are always helpful. And there we go. Okay, now if we could animate that. Ah, lovely. So the future of all business, proximity. Let me start by mentioning a show, 3 Billion Seconds. These are conversations with people creating the future. I encourage you to go there. I would love to interact with you on these dialogues, and perhaps in the future do some interviews here in Bangladesh. So I like to start with success that leads to failure. Over the next 10, 20 years, some Bangladeshi companies will rise and become global leaders. I have no doubt, as you approach $1 trillion a year in your economy, that this will happen. And you might recognize many or all of these companies. All these companies are on the screen for two reasons. Number one, they all had a near-death experience. Some have died, some have recovered, but nonetheless, they've all come near death. Number two, they were all the very best company on the planet, and what they did for decades. For decades, they were the gold standard company worldwide. For decades, people would say, if we could just be like Pan Am. That was an airline, by the way. I don't know if you remember them. How can this happen? How can you go from the top of the global corporate hierarchy to near death? Well, these are long answers, but I'm going to tell you it's not exactly what people think. Some people say, oh, they weren't innovating. Well, let me point out in 1993 when IBM came near death, they had the third largest corporate R&D budget on the planet. They had just won a Nobel Prize for inventing the scanning tunneling electron microscope. They were innovating, but they weren't innovating on the right things to maintain relevance to the customers in the marketplace. Also, do you think there were smart people at these companies? Absolutely, every one of them. Do you think they didn't notice the changes going on in the world? Of course they did. They had strategy offsites. They made really nice slide decks with stuff about the future, and then nothing happened. Why is this? Well, there's one thing that happened at all of these companies except for Lehman Brothers and AIG. Maybe there was too much innovation going on there, but that's another issue. At all of the other companies, the following dynamic happened in different ways. And that was, for 30 years, you're making a lot of money, everything's going great. Which, by the way, many of your companies are in this case right now because the economy is growing. Bangladesh is doing well. For 30 years, you're making a lot of money, everything's going great. And then, for the first time, a memo comes from the chief financial officer. This quarter, we will not quite hit our numbers. What are the two things that all businesses do to solve that problem right now? They cut costs, they cut everything they can cut, they cut marketing, they cut R&D, they cut, don't go to that brand forum, we're cutting everything. And then the other thing we try to do is sell more stuff as fast as possible. And guess what happens the first time? It works. We rose to the occasion, we mustered, we cut, and we sold, and we hit our numbers. And then we go to another quarter and we're not going to quite hit our numbers. And guess what we do? We cut, and we sell, and we kind of hit our numbers. But here's the thing. The larger you are, the longer your runway, the longer what growth does not look like when you collapse is like this. It looks like this. The larger you are, it looks like this. For a long time, a long, slow slide until it looks like that. And that's what happened in these companies because they cut, and they sold, which meant they became more and better at what they already did. And when the underlying dynamic of the marketplace, when the demands of customers change and they don't want that anymore, now you've eliminated all of your optionality on the future. You've eliminated all your experiments for what's coming next. And that's what happened to all the rest of these companies in different ways. So what do we do? Very quickly, all companies need ways to manage both fortification and exploration. Fortification is the near-term future of the business, the incremental innovation to stay just ahead of the competition. Exploration is the stuff we have not yet done. The important point here is that these are two completely different environments. They take different processes, metrics, ways to allocate capital. If you're using the same metrics to select projects for the fortress as you do for the ship, you're doing it wrong. I don't even have to know what your metrics are to tell you that. But here's the key point. These are different people. People tend to either love the fortress, getting the ball bearing perfect off the manufacturing line every time, executing excellence every week, in and out, or they love to discover the future, to understand what customers might want even before the customer can tell you what they want. Because, by the way, if they're telling you they want something, they're also telling the competitor. People on the ship thrive in a context of some uncertainty. You take someone who should be in the ship and you put them in the fortress for too long, it's a soul-sucking experience. And I mean this literally. You take someone from the fortress who's excellent at making stuff happen, executing every day, and you put them in the ship without guidance, and I'm a big fan of cycling people through, but you put them on the ship with no guidance, they can't handle the uncertainty. They say, last week you told me to do this, and this week you tell me to do something else. Do you know where this company's going? And the reality is, when we're on the ship, the answer is no. We actually have no idea. That's the point. So, my question for you is, which one are you more of? Are you more the fortress, or are you more the ship? One is not better than the other. To have effective, sustainable enterprises long run, we must have homes for both. What about the people who report to you? What about your colleagues? Are they fortress or ship? What about the leadership of your company? We need both. So what I want to do now is talk a little bit about foresight for the future. Where might we be going? I'm going to right now summarize my entire class at Kellogg in 2 sentences. The class is Innovation Strategy and Management. The essence of innovation strategy is building a portfolio of options on the future, because we cannot predict the future. Thus, we must have a portfolio of diverse options. The essence of innovation management is resolving uncertainty through a rational process. The essence of innovation management is resolving uncertainty through a rational process. Now, we don't have enough time to go into both. I'm going to focus more on innovation strategy and a specific piece called Foresight. This is a fracking well, hydraulic fracturing, in the United States. Now, think what you want about this technology. There are a lot of people against it, many people for it. The reality is that my firm, Clario, 12 years ago, was doing a Foresight program with a large global oil and gas company. And at that time, 12 years ago, we could not find a single expert in the global oil and gas industry who thought that fracking would amount to anything at all. Nobody. Yet, in the past 10 years, it has changed the global geopolitical picture. Literally. Not just the oil and gas industry, but the geopolitical picture on Earth. Now, the reason I share this is, number one, when we think we have a problem that we need solutions for, to whom do we normally go? The experts. Now, I'm, as a professor, obviously a fan of being an expert. Please hire as many experts as possible. But the problem is, if you always look in the same places, you're liable to find the same answers. And most experts are going to give you the traditional story and perspective. If what you're doing isn't working, try finding others with a different perspective. Now, what we told our client at the time was not, this is going to be big. We didn't know that. It could have been a failure, as everybody thought it would be. But we said, we don't know whether it's going to work or not, so you need to keep a close eye on it and be there before the competition if this thing starts to work. And fortunately for them, they did. So let's think about the next 20 years for a little bit. How might the world look 20 years from now? Perhaps 2041 even. To start, to ground, look 20 years ago, Apple Computer was definitely going to go out of business. And the United States was running out of oil. Both of which we know did not happen. I would propose that change will be far more dramatic going forward. Now, you've heard of all or most of these technologies. You could probably add others to the list. Everyone's talking about them, wound up about them, but there's one common underlying dynamic they all drive in the economy in different ways that very few people have noted. And that is that each of these technologies, in their own ways, distribute sensing, access to data, agency, which is decision-making, production, think 3D printing, think rooftop solar energy generation, at smaller and smaller locations all around the economy, ever closer to each consumer, each business, each possible use case. They distribute these capabilities at smaller and smaller locations in time and space all around the economy, and thus what they drive is the production and provision of products and services ever closer to the moment at which they might be demanded. Let me say this again. What I'm not talking about is just better inventory control. I mean literally all kinds of products and services over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, the period you're considering today with your 2041 objective. All value, not just products and services, because remember, your customers don't care about your products and services. They care about the value you're providing them. All value will be driven closer and closer to the moment of demand in time and space. I'll give you an example of how this is happening already. Amazon, that scary American company, and it's impressive and also a little bit scary, is doing something called anticipatory shipping. What anticipatory shipping is they watch your online behavior. What are you clicking on? What are you spending your time on? What are you reading? And there's even something called cursor hover time, which we call digital drooling. So your wife told you not to buy that fishing rod, but you keep going back to that fishing rod, and Amazon sees that, and they know even though your wife told you not to buy it, you're going to buy it. So they send that fishing rod to the distribution center near your house before you've ordered the product. They're not sending 144 fishing rods to a distribution center, no. They're sending that one exact fishing rod near your house before you've ordered it. They've been doing this for almost 3 years. Do you think they're getting better at it? Now, this is not new. We've wanted this forever, because here's the point. Human beings want what they want, when they want, where they want it. And by the way, they want it for free, but let's set that aside. It's hard to do anything with that. Human beings want what they want, where they want, when they want it, and thus, anyone who can give it to them will win. Think back in the 1970s and 80s in manufacturing, just-in-time inventory management, having just enough supply in the manufacturing facility to hit our service level. That drove down working capital costs. It was a revolution in manufacturing. The fact that we did not go further with it was not because we didn't want to, it's because we couldn't. We did not have the technology to do so. Today, increasingly, we do. And by the way, these transitions are very much where we were with personal computers back in the 1970s. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, the founders of Apple, were simply hobbyists in the 1970s. No one was paying any attention to them at all. Until the early 80s, when IBM launched the PC and it became safe for businesses to buy personal computers. I would propose that we are in this situation today with 3D printing. For the last 15 years, there's been something called the Maker Faire. There's a maker community all over the world, including in Bangladesh, where thousands of people get together to share the little plastic baubles that they've made for their kids and all the cool things they're making in their homes. But now 3D printing is rising into viable business option. Consider that Rolls-Royce and General Electric now make metal parts for aircraft engines using 3D printing. Do you think it's going to get better? Absolutely. So a question I'd ask you about your business, about the value that you add for customers. Pick a product or service that you currently sell. What is the underlying value that your customers get from buying that product or service? Not the product, but the value. Now imagine 20 or 30 years from now, it can be produced and provided the moment at which it is demanded. Not before, not 6 months in advance in a factory that's then shipped to over the sea through a distribution center, and it waits there in inventory. No, produced and provided the moment at which it's provided. Demanded. How might your industry look different? Will your company still have a role in this future world? In many cases, the answer is no. Longer term, what does this all mean? Now, this will look different in different parts of the world, of course. But as we also know, this is a global economy. So the demands in the US and Europe and Latin America, Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia, they intertwine and interconnect. The customers you have in other parts of the world will start to change their needs and requirements. Think about, for instance, self-driving vehicles. Now, I know this will show up in different parts of the world at different rates, at different speeds. Might it take 5 years? Might it take 30 years? I don't know. I'm not here to make that prediction. But what I can tell you is in most of our lifetimes, self-driving vehicles will become a normal thing. At some point in the next 25 years, the public dialogue will shift from should we allow self-driving cars on the road to should we allow human drivers on the road, and I can tell you who's going to win. At that point, what happens? What happens to all of those people who make their livings from driving trucks and driving taxis? This is not just a social discussion. This is a fundamental discussion of democracy, of society, and of business. Because all those people that make their money driving trucks and driving taxis, they buy the things and pull through the economy, everything that you provide. They are the consumers and the taxpayers that generate prosperity. Where will they go? What will they do? And let me share an observation that is fundamentally relevant to your evolution, in fact, all of our evolutions economically over the next 20 years, but especially an economy that's rising in textiles and more complex manufacture. Consider that today we have a global economy, a supply chain, optimized for scale manufacturing at a distance. The larger your plant, the lower your costs. Overall, not always true, but usually. The larger your manufacturing facility, the lower your costs. Over the next 30 years, this model will be obliterated. Now, let me clarify. What I'm not saying is that in 30 years there will be no huge plants in China or Bangladesh or Germany. Of course, there will still be some huge plants doing some things, but there will also be smaller installations, mid-sized spaces, distributed spaces in very small footprints, and even a 3D printing unit on the counter in your kitchen at home, producing certain goods. This will start at the peripheries, at the edges, in low-cost environments where the economics start to make sense. I'll give you an example. In the United States, 25% of all plastic replacement parts for automotive cost more to ship than they do to manufacture. So right now, the economics, I'm not talking about fun technology, I'm talking about core business economics of 3D printing, are just now starting to shift at the edges. And you know what's going to happen. It's going to get better and better and eventually incur into the core of our markets and transform the global supply chain. Think about buying one matching fork. It turns out it's really hard to buy one matching fork, and I know this because my 6-year-old daughter, I was explaining to her the notion of an experiment. Being a scientist, I'm very excited about sharing with my daughters this science thing, and she's very interested. So I explained an experiment is you have a hypothesis, and then you do a little experiment to test your hypothesis. So the experiment she decided to do was she took a fork and she put it into the sink and turned the thing on in the sink that goes, and it wasn't good for the fork, I'll just tell you that. So ideally, we'd like to buy one matching fork. Turns out that's very hard. How do you buy one fork? Well, someone in Western Australia mines iron ore, puts it on a ship, sends it to China, they melt it down, they alloy it, they send it to another manufacturing facility, they make 12 forks, they put 12 forks in a pallet, shove it onto a ship, it goes across the Pacific Ocean to the port of Long Beach, into a rail line, into a truck, into a store, and I buy 12 forks. Today, it is technologically trivial. We cannot do it because we do not yet have the infrastructure. But it is technically trivial to download a file, push a button, and print one metal fork. Over the next 20 to 30 years, our global supply chain will be ripped apart and hybridized. Large facilities, mid-sized facilities, small facilities, micro facilities in the home. I want you to start thinking what the implications of that will be for not only your supply to various industries worldwide as a supplier, but also, by the way, the opportunities here at home. The opportunities to produce more things that you don't have to import from other countries and pay a high value-added price. 2 years ago, I was speaking at the Frankfurt Auto Show at a program about non-traditional automotive technologies, and the chairman of Peugeot Citroën, Carlos Tavares, told me, "Professor, today, a family that needs 2 cars in the future might only need 1 because of self-driving vehicles." Why is this? Well, the family that today might need 2 cars in the future might only need 1 because that vehicle can take one spouse to work and then the other spouse to work and then drop the kids off at school and take another spouse out shopping. Well, that's 3 spouses. Anyway, it's 25 years from now, so whatever. And he said, here's an interesting point. The automotive industry today, we have one metric that drives all of our decisions. Our capacity decisions, our platform decisions, our marketing decisions, our design decisions, unit sales. And at some point in the next 20 years, this metric will be destroyed. This core metric for the industry will take us down the wrong paths. Now, today it's still the right metric. So I said to Carlos, what are you going to do? And he said, we're going to continue to follow unit sales for sure. But we're also following a few other metrics, new metrics. And by the way, this is very cheap. Find a few additional metrics. What does Tesla do? What does Uber do? What do companies in other industries track their performance? We're tracking those metrics to see how they would impact our business decisions so that in the future, as the world changes, we're ready. I said, Carlos, it sounds like you have a portfolio of metrics. And he said, that's right. Consider what the metrics are that you use today to drive your business. Why do they work? Might they in the future take you down the wrong paths? And how do you know? Start tracking alternative metrics to make sure you're ready before the world changes. One of our clients at Clario for many years has been Castrol, the big lubricants company, and in 2010 we were looking at the future of their customers, not lubricants, but their customers. And one of the questions we raised in 2010 with them was, what about electric vehicles? Now, it's important to note that electric vehicles take no lubrication. So you'd think that lubes companies would be kind of concerned about electric vehicles. But back in 2010, no one was paying any attention at all. For a very simple reason. 120 years of proof that electric vehicles will never happen. 120 years of failure. Try arguing at the office to do something where it's failed for 120 years. Maybe this time is different. This vehicle, the Tesla S, the picture was presented by Steve Jurvetson, one of the top venture capitalists in the world back in 2010. He opened a session we did for Castrol in Silicon Valley. We were trying to soften up the leadership team at Castrol so that they paid attention to this electric vehicle thing. His firm had just made a $100 million investment in Tesla. Remember, everyone knew at that point Tesla was going to fail. Didn't turn out like that, but that's what we all knew. Now, what is the main reason most people don't buy electric vehicles? Well, price is coming down rapidly, so it's increasingly not that. It's range. Charging stations, range anxiety. People say, when there's finally infrastructure all over the country, charging stations I can rely on, I'll buy an electric vehicle. This feels right. It sounds right, but it's completely wrong. Imagine that in most parts of the world, many people have access to something called a garage. And in your garage, you can actually plug things in.
Now, I know the electrical grid is somewhat different here, but keep in mind that we also have a complementary technology called rooftop solar, distributed energy generation, which can be a revolution for an environment like this. Earlier today, we heard about leapfrogging. This is exactly an opportunity for Bangladesh to leapfrog. Nonetheless, people can plug this car in their garage, yet they're worried about charging station infrastructure. By the year 2025, a vehicle like this will get 1,000 miles on one charge. Now, who cares about charging stations? Right now, there are dozens of investors investing hundreds of millions of dollars in charging station infrastructure companies. They will all lose their money, and I can guarantee it. Why do we make these decisions? Because we take the new thing and we cram it into the old paradigm. We do it over and over again. The very first television show was literally a radio show on TV. I've seen it. There were people reading off of scripts. There was a sound effects guy off to the side going, and you could see him. And then somebody said, no, wait, we can do this like a stage show. And then here was the coup de grace. We can record it, we can edit it, and then we can put it on TV. Wow! Ladies and gentlemen, that took 15 years to figure out. We do not have 15 years. 15 years from now, you're done with your 10 years. You're on to the next 10 years. It's time to get smart faster. Remember, true breakthroughs do not happen by doing a little bit better at what you already do. They happen by doing things that could never have happened before. When you see a new technology, most companies look at it and say, how can we use this to be a little better at what we are already doing? This is a good question. Please keep asking it. But the better question is, what are the fundamental capabilities of that technology that allows us to do things we could never have considered before? That's where the true breakthroughs come from. In my travels around the world, I'm privileged to meet leaders that think differently, leaders that do extraordinary things. This is one of them, Antanas Mockus. Mockus was the mayor of Bogota during Colombia during a very challenging period in their history. The FARC, the narco-terrorists, were on the doorstep of Bogota. It was not clear that the government might fall. He became mayor at this difficult time, and of course everyone knew we needed better security, we needed better schools, we needed better roads, infrastructure, all these things, but he said, you know what, we don't have any money, but we have to make an impact, we have to figure out how to advance the agenda. So he thought about the problem differently and more deeply than anyone else had. He said, what is an underlying challenge we face in Colombia? And that was the collapse of civil society, the collapse of the civility of people to each other. Are we nice to each other in the public realm, on the streets, not just on TV, but in the normal everyday lives? And he said, in Bogota, we were no longer civil. And by the way, I see Bangladeshis as being very welcoming and very civil, and you have a great advantage there. Colombians are wonderful, loving people, open people, but they had become distrustful. So what did Antanas Mockus do? He said, well, number one, we have no money. So that's one design principle. Number two, we have to affect the civility of Bogotanians to each other. And so what he did is he did a number of things. They tried some things that worked, some things that didn't work. They hired mimes, you know, the people that paint their face white and don't talk and act, to walk on street corners and imitate people doing good things and imitate people doing bad things. Now, this is a very dangerous job in Bogota, but when you're a mime, you know, you don't get a lot of calls. So they took the call. And guess what happened? It made it on the evening news. Every night, people would turn on the news to find out what the mimes were doing. It generated a public dialogue. But here was the pinnacle success of this initiative. Mockus understood his people. He understood that Colombians, number one, respond to guilt. It's a Roman Catholic society by background. They respond to guilt. Number 2, Colombians have opinions and they love expressing their opinions. Number 3, Colombians love soccer or football. So, guilt, opinions, and football. Mocha's had 300,000 referee cards printed, green on one side with a thumbs up, red on the other with a thumbs down, and he handed it to 5% of the population at random, and he said, "You are now a ref. Every time you see someone doing something good, pull out the green card and make sure everybody sees it. Every time you see somebody doing something naughty, pull out the red card and make sure everybody sees that." And people loved it. They couldn't wait to pull the card out. People started making their own cards. My sister lives in Bogota, married my best friend in Latin America, and everyone in Bogota agrees that that initiative had a transformative effect on the hearts and minds of Colombians. How expensive was it? Understand your audience, understand your people, understand the underlying challenges beyond the challenges that most people notice. One of the most exciting things I see here is this conversation of where will we be in 10 years? Where will we be in 2041? You have an extraordinary opportunity, and I'm excited to come back and visit over and over again through the years. Human beings are motivated by a sense of mission and purpose more than anything else. Money is important to a point, but it can actually even backfire. More than anything else, human beings are motivated by a sense of mission and purpose. Think of the entrepreneur who gets up in the morning against all the odds to make something new happen. Think of the terrorist who gets up every morning against all the odds, and we know that that person is wrong, but nonetheless they are literally putting their life on the line for something they believe, because mission and purpose is what drives human beings. It's what will drive America and will drive Bangladesh. And humans grow through challenges. We do not grow when everything's going great. I mean, it's a horrible thing, but when the money's rolling in, boy, that feels good, but we don't learn much. We grow when we face adversity. So your job as a leader is to identify and pose the challenges to your people, to your companies, to your teams. Pose those challenges to them before the marketplace does it to us, because it will. Thank you very much for having me with you.